All right, everyone, welcome back to People, Passion, Process, the Art of Science. I'm Matthias Fitzpatrick, and today I have a very special guest, my postdoc and research scientist, Salil K. Bedkahal, who's been in my group, well, it's over a year now.
Over a year, yes.
And we've done a lot of fun science together that I hope we get time to talk about today. So the name of this podcast is People, Passion, Process. So tell me who you are. Like, let's start with the people. Tell me a little bit about your background and like what led you to, being here today.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me into this podcast. It's really my honor to talk about the science that we are doing in this podcast. Um, I come from a family, my family background essentially is my father is involved in many intellectual activities, especially related to philosophy and social science. So I have been always inspired by fundamental questions asked in Vedas about the existence of human being and who we are and whether there is space time, whether there is something beyond it. And those are the kinds of questions which inspired me to actually pursue astrophysics as my career in the very beginning of my career. But then I was also interested in how things work in each other. So really a curious mind that would pick up anything that I'm curious about. So for example, I was interested in how MRI machines work and I ended up doing a master's in biomedical physics. And then I was curious about how quantum systems work and how can you design an MRI machine? What are the governing principles?
Mhm.
And that's how I ended up doing open quantum systems theory and then quantum computing. So I pursued my PhD at the University of Toronto with the inspiration of understanding how quantum systems behave when they're probed by
Mhm.
external environments, and also studied the interference phenomenon, which I'm particularly very fascinated by holograms and diffraction patterns. So this was in line with my passion, to understand phenomena that involve waves and patterns.
Mhm.
So that's how I ended up doing my PhD in quantum transport and open quantum system. So
Mhm.
I second inspiration that always I have been little bit puzzled by an arrow of time and always interested in understanding the deeper foundations of time. So
Mhm.
I was attracted deeply towards quantum thermodynamics, and I pursued my postdoctoral research work in that area to understand what is thermodynamics, how then quantum mechanics and thermodynamics be uh, woven together, what kind of insights can I get from that.
Mhm.
And then on the technological side, I was also very interested in how can I store information into a space that is really has very, very many degrees of freedom. Like, can I store Wikipedia in hydrogen atoms? So whenever I want, I can just paste it. So those are the kinds of questions which were inspiring me essentially to understand um, how can we design better batteries or storages using this degrees of freedom. Like so, that really drove me towards this area of Gottesman, Kita, and Preskill states because and encoding the oscillator into something infinite dimensional. Hilbert's
Mhm.
something that I was really, really fascinated by. And that's
Mhm.
so I ended up working bosonic quantum error correction. It was a fascinating research area. Where you could take a discrete system and just encode it into a continuous one.
Mhm.
And while working in industry, I quickly realized that there are these clearest defects which were kind of bottlenecks in this
Mhm.
all sorts of technology, and I was really uh, passionate about understanding how those defects work, how they affected devices, and that's how I found this postdoctoral position at TAP was as a
Mhm.
perfect match. So this journey just started with curiosity, and here I am now talking.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lot of scientists' journey is curiosity drives all of it. You know, like the middle word in this title is passion. And you know, it's not something that's easy to teach. You sort of and you know, I feel lucky. I'm sure you're the same way that you kind of figured out what your passions were early on. I think a lot of people kind of struggle to find that. Um, you know, there's the classic expression, something along the lines of like, if you love what you do, you don't really work a day in your life. I mean, do you feel like physics has given you that sort of satisfaction? Obviously, there's aspects that feel like work, but it's like what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, yeah. Well, is of course the answer is physics. Because I would say what motivates me to lose my sleep, the answer is also physics. So yeah, I have been fascinated by this logical way of thinking and drawing inferences from it and understanding about the nature. So
Hmm.
when you do physics, you feel the power of logic,
Mhm.
understand anything, and you can design anything using those principles. So this
Mhm.
gives me a sense of some sense of power, of course, in a
Mhm.
positive sense that
Mhm.
you need this power so that you can make uh, you can have positive impact on society.
Mhm.
That point of view, I think that physics is a very powerful tool.
Mhm.
Uh, Secondly, uh, it directly at least tries to answer some questions related to the very existence of human beings. So
Mhm.
it really gives you the fundamental understanding of who you are,
Mhm.
and I think that is much in line with philosophy and the ancient Indian traditions with the Upanishads, and they ask who you are.
Mhm.
I think physics is a way uh, to seek that answer.
Mhm.
From both these point of views, I think that the physics is the only thing that is keeping me alive. So
Yeah, we've had a lot of good conversations over the years, and I don't want to get too technical on it, but I've been myself going back to sort of foundations of quantum mechanics. And it's been partly inspired, I think, by our research together because, you know, I want to get into the weeds of the paper that we're going to link to in this particular episode that has been recently published in Institute of Physics Materials for Quantum Technology. And the paper is really about, as you know, of course, you know, explaining it to the audience here on the podcast that superconducting circuits are these amazing devices where you can have very little loss because they are made out of superconducting materials. Um, and that's a really nice platform for doing quantum computation and, you know, simulation of quantum systems. But the problem is that there's still loss. And I think a little bit of the perspective that I bring here is that when I was working at IBM Research, I was on the team that really took the biggest quantum computers at the time and kind of kept them online, kept them running, taking jobs, that kind of thing. And we were always plagued by these two-level system defects, which are these little, potentially atomic scale or handfuls of atoms defects that people don't really understand. You know, there's a lot of speculation about, oh, you can have two-level system defects that are actual defects in the substrate material. But a lot of the evidence seems to point towards the superconductor oxides, you know, so aluminum oxide or, you know, tantalum oxide, these kind of things. And I think this is a big hole in science is like we know there's an engineering consequence for these things, but what are they? And so I guess maybe Salil, again, like very high level, can you explain a little bit about like how we are trying to tackle this?
right. So, yeah, so to be honest, that's the origin of those defects is still unknown.
We haven't solved it yet.
There are many candidates like hydrogen bonds and but oxides, and you can think about this as some kind of an ice, and it's sitting there and it affects your qubit. And so, if you want to probe those defects, the way you they interact with your qubit, and so the way traditionally people probe that is you can look at the coherence time of your qubit, for example, T1, and then this T1 drips, and as Matthias mentioned, that because we are at dilation temperature, if there is no other loss, but then you're losing your coherence time, then there must be something that is causing that trip. And then you can do experiments and gather statistics on it. I don't want to get into the technical details of that, but you can think if you think about your qubit as some kind of a two-level system, think about it as a nanomagnet, then you have something around it that you don't want. You want that magnet to show you the proper direction, but then the stuff around it is going to mess up with this compass. And so you're not going to be able to navigate properly like that stuff is. I mean, this is just an analogy.
Yeah. Comes in with spins and things like that. I guess let's zoom out a little bit without getting too technical, and I'm just kind of curious what. So we actually had a pretty quick turnaround on this paper. I think partly because we had a lot of really, strategic meetings, and I think this is kind of what I want to get at in the podcast is like what's kind of going on behind the science. Like we can talk for the whole time about the actual science of our work. I think that was a good intro to the big question. We found a really nice way to solve this, which is a very direct way to probe it. And I think there's a lot of beautiful science that we've uncovered with regards to like disorder and how strongly we drive these things, how much sort of coherence do you have. There's a lot of deep quantum questions, but like I think we did a good job getting this paper out. It's a pretty long paper, but
Yeah,
maybe you can talk a little bit about, at least from your perspective, what the process was like, like how we actually handled this.
I would like to talk about, I mean, I'm particularly very emotional about this because when I started with Matthias on this particular experiment, there were very many attempts initially that we didn't get the signal that we were looking for. What we're looking for is like you have a material, just forget about qubits and the technical detail, just think about the materials and uh, you're cooling it through dilution temperature. That's all what
Sure.
matters.
About 7 millikelvin in our case.
And then then there are all these scatterers or these two-level defects, and when you illuminate external microwave on it, they're supposed to scatter. So you're supposed to get the signal, and then you need to extract the signatures of those defects. It's simply the input output kind of an approach if you think about it.
Which Celio, I should mention, Celio has simulations behind him. This is experimental data on mine. So these are actual emission of little defects after we've driven them quite hard. So keep
So after a couple of frustrating, and it's interesting when you go back uh, and recall, you got some interesting signals from the sample, which we thought were TLSs, but we couldn't reproduce those. And that's the tough time in science. That you see something that's exciting that you cannot reproduce. That means it's likely to be something spurious. And that actually was a motivation to design an alternative experiment. You see, the main takeaway from this is like if something is not working, don't get depressed and give up. If it is not working repetitively, that means you have to change the approach. And that was the first learning uh,
Yeah.
experience. To me as a theorist, we were doing an experiment and
Mm-hmm.
changed the way Nelly's and doing.
Mm-hmm.
And this another way of doing experiment was like, okay, there are all of these defects. I'm just gonna shine a pulse on it and turn it off and see if they emit whatever that I send, they should absorb and emit.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the simplest possible way I can place this. And we were able to actually get those emissions. And that was the turning point because you're getting all of these emissions and you do all the sanity checks and make sure that these emissions are likely to be coming from the defects,
Mm-hmm.
putting out the other spurious sources.
Mm-hmm.
Then that was really a relief.
Mm-hmm.
It was a relief in a sense that nobody has done this before. Like people use qubits to probe these defects. We are directly using a wafer
Mm-hmm.
without using a fully fabricated device. And to me, as a theorist, it was not obvious that this will work. And I will give you a simple reason. It's like these materials are highly disordered, as Matthias mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, as a theorist, that if you're trying to drive such a disordered material, it need not respond because
Mm-hmm.
it's disordered. Why would
Which is maybe explain what you mean by disordered
yeah.
in that sense.
So what I mean by that is really you can think about it as like you have a crystal lattice which is pretty ordered, right? I mean it has
Yeah.
a unit cell.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine now instead of a crystal lattice, you have defects or impurities in the crystal
Mm-hmm.
so that they distort the lattice.
Mm-hmm.
All the symmetry that you have in this is completely broken. So you have no translational symmetry whatsoever. Like different directions would look completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, then this system is crudely called as disorder. I don't have time to get into the technical
Yeah.
bits of it, but that would be a disorder.
Sort of in the traditional sense of disorder.
Yeah.
But a lot of what, I guess in our case, it's a lot of defects with different resonant frequencies that are all coupled in some way.
You can think about it as if you have, let's say, a rock band festival,
Mm-hmm.
but each and imagine that there are 100 musicians allowed to participate in that, 100 bands. Then each band is just randomly located somewhere, and there is a like distribution of fundamental frequencies that
Mm-hmm.
musicians can play on their instruments.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen eventually when they start playing is that there might be a beating between them.
Mm-hmm.
And detect that beating, then you can infer that yes, there is some sort of a rock concert that's going on. But because they're beating collectively as opposed to individually, because here we are, we have millions of defects. Each one of them may have its own resonance frequency, and you are driving all of them externally. So there's
Mm-hmm.
some collective behavior that they're emitting.
Yeah. And millions, maybe, on the whole,
Yeah.
we haven't measured that many.
Oh.
And it depends on the material, but I like this analogy a lot. So let's stick with this rock festival thing where all these musicians are playing kind of cacophonously and they have different instruments playing it, different notes and that sort of thing, right? I feel like the best analogy for what we did, and this was the breakthrough, is that we have one big drum on a loudspeaker and we are hitting that drum at a specific frequency very, very hard. And, all these musicians are playing different parts of their notes. And I guess the best way to think about it is that if that drum that we applied all of them is sufficiently loud, we can kind of synchronize all of the musicians' instruments so that they beat in exactly the same way every time. And that allows us to average a lot and get like nice data sets like this, which is, again, to Salil's point, these are potentially very tiny signals, but we actually get a bunch of the musicians in the mix by playing really loud from above. And then they all kind of play at their tunes, but it's all lockstep with the external drive that we applied and then shut off. So they're all kind of
Think about movie like Supernatural, right? The way I like to think about it is like each rock band is playing its tune.
Mm-hmm.
And they're off resonant with respect to each other. It's just noise. I mean, it would
Yeah.
you just see something coming in here, but it will really not synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
But as Matthias mentioned, that if one man is driving their drum beat so hard, what will happen eventually? It will force the other bands to come in a resonance with them
Mm-hmm.
so that there is this harmony. You're
Mm-hmm.
bringing other musicians in resonance with you by
Mm-hmm.
driving your drum beat harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you overcome this off resonant
Mm-hmm.
disorder. I mean, that's precisely the disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different frequency of being. That's how you overcome this disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And to do, and that means the interactions between these band players is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So from the fundamental physics point of view, also this is an interesting problem because it's a disordered system.
Mm-hmm.
You can make this system beat if you drive it harder, because driving it harder brings all the other defects in resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Once they're in resonance, they can uh, affect each other because they're dipoles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a beautiful analogy, and
Yeah.
that was the illusion, also partly behind doing simulation. I mean, the the most beautiful part of this experiment. I mean, the experiment itself is beautiful. The design of the waveguide
Yeah.
and the simplicity of the experiment and the richness of the results that you get out of it.
Yeah.
And then there is this, we see this physics with like few spins in our numerical simulations.
Mm-hmm.
It will do
Like in your background there.
that, the background that I have. And that I think is really beautiful that it, not always you have to start with the first principle numerical or computational approach to understand everything. I
Mm-hmm.
think you can you can build simple models to be produced this, and I think this is the beauty of human endeavor that perhaps I would like to highlight, because we often think that, oh, we need a lot of computational power to understand something.
Mm-hmm.
True, you do in many cases,
Yeah.
but often the way physics progresses is like, what is the simplest possible model that you can have
Yeah.
that can capture the key qualitative characteristics that
Mm-hmm.
we observe in the experiment. Like,
Mm-hmm.
thanks to Matthias for giving me space and time to actually pursue these simulations according to my own schedule and according to my own intuition. So
Yeah.
this was a great uh, this was a great symphony in a sense that I was able to participate in the experimental music with my own tunes,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
eventually in tune with them, of course.
Yeah.
But that I think that's the most satisfying experience to me as a theoretical physicist. Like, theoretical physics in its own is interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but often you talk to an experimentalist about an idea and they would say, "Oh, I cannot do an experiment," or "It is so, I don't think this would work."
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to convince an experimentalist to do something.
Mm-hmm.
That's one art of doing theoretical physics. The other part of this art is like an experimentalist has some data that they want you to explain
Mm-hmm.
what is going on. And I think in this particular project, I was in the second category. Mm-hmm. So that's the most satisfying experience, I think, that understanding what is going on in the experiment.
And I think on the experimental side, I also kind of, we spend, I guess the origin story from my perspective is that we spend a lot of time making resonant structures, whether it's cavities or qubits and things like that. And it's often a multi-step fabrication process. You can sometimes, in our lab now, we've been working with these 3D cavities. And the nice thing about that is that it's sort of modular in the sense that you can put different qubits inside and cool them down and swap parts here and there. And I think that from an engineering perspective is really nice because you can sort of isolate effects due to each of the components. So you can properly characterize one, you can then add the other one on top, and you can kind of see the new impact of the new device. And I was inspired by that from some work out of Yale, out of Rob Sholkoff's lab, where they were using one of these cavities to measure the loss of a material like sapphire. And that's a beautiful experiment. They got a lot of precision. The problem was that it's very, you know about the loss at one frequency, which to me is not enough information because a lot of the resonance structures on these devices are at different frequencies, partly because you need them to not be interacting and things like that. So we were thinking, how can we get more information out of these experiments? That was like the overarching goal, is to get more information about the loss channels. So we started to make more complicated cavities with more modes. And I had some other undergrad students that spent an entire summer trying to fit this in a self-consistent way, which, we can talk a lot about like what it means to fit data properly. You can't have too many fit parameters. There's a lot of nitty-gritty things that are super important on the scientific process there. But what we landed on is, what if we just kind of went to infinite modes, which is essentially just a waveguide? Again, it's super simple. It's literally just a metal box, and we shine microwaves through the sample in some sense. And while that seems like a really simple idea, I think there are a lot of people that wouldn't have ever tried that because you're looking at this disordered system. And, like, maybe it's serendipity, maybe it's intuition, but I was kind of like, we should try this. And as Salil mentioned in the beginning, we saw some interesting preliminary results that were kind of promising, but we kind of weren't looking at the system in the right way. We were just applying periodic pulses and looking at the average amount of power that made it through. And all of the data that you're seeing in both of our backgrounds, if you're listening on Spotify, you won't see this. You can check out the YouTube. But all of the interesting bit is happening within around a microsecond. It's a very short time after each one of those pulses. Yeah. So we're hitting this drum beat, to go back to the music analog. And really all of the interesting stuff is in the little bit of the ringing of those drums after you hit them.
That's right.
And I think all of the physics that Salil was talking about has enabled this technology so we can get enough signal. We're not even using fancy amplifiers here because we're driving really hard. And on one level, that's really simple, but I think it sort of shows you, I don't know, I'm the type of experimentalist that just, let's try to build something new and interesting and see what happens. And sometimes you come up short, but sometimes you come up with this physics that I think will be hopefully very important for the field, because we can measure devices at all stages of fabrication and hopefully isolate like where these defects are and hopefully understand what they are.
Correct.
So
Yeah, this is definitely, I mean, the experiment is simple, but it's not easy to design simple things. Because all the experiments which people do on qubits, they use a very low dry power. Here they are putting so many photons into the system, which is not ideal for qubit, but for defects, yes, because you just want them to be excited and be synchronous with each other. That's all what it matters when it comes to detecting the emissions from the.
yeah.
It's a relatively simple experiment, uh, but it's not trivial to interpret what is going on. It's really given that the disorder, no? And I think that makes this experiment more beautiful and the work more satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, we've got plenty more to do. So yes, I mean, do you have any sort of thoughts, like reflecting on your career and maybe, this latest experiment, about maybe advice you can give to the next generation of researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing first is like you often fail in the endeavors that you're trying to do. And that failure has to be seen positively. If you're repetitively failing, which means you're not looking at it correct. So you change the way you look at it and sometimes change the way you do it. So don't get discouraged.
There's a quantum analogy there of like tunneling out of some little holes or something, right?
Yeah. Of course,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a statistically, you are likely to succeed, of course.
Yeah.
But you really don't get discouraged from the failures. That is the most important message because graduate school is, uh, I mean, it is stressful. Let me put it that way. You have to do a lot of work, to earn your doctorate degree. You have to try different paths. Some of them will not work, some of them will work. Sure. But getting discouraged from the failure would be the biggest bottleneck for you to succeed in your scientific career.
Yeah.
And second, my second advice to students is that don't take science personally. What I mean by that is you're trying to do something that's not working. So you cannot manipulate nature to work according to your whims and fancies. She will behave the way she wants to behave.
Yeah.
You have to chase Mother Nature and not the other way around. And many people just take it personally, saying that, oh, I just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Or when something is about working and your advisors give you an advice, people often don't like it. Like there are lots of ego issues because we take things personally. And science is the only thing I think in this world, and it could be true for other art forms, where you don't take things personally. If you fail, you just understand why it fails and you go for. It actually allows you to fail. You of course have to fail every time in a different fashion. If you're failing the same way, you are making definitely some error. Let's leave that aside. But you get an opportunity to often fail. Look at the history, black body radiation, classical theory failed, and it's only the discrete quantization and hypothesis that were able to explain everything. So try, like, you have to you have to show bit of a daring. Your personality should be such that try new things.
Yeah.
That and then it will likely to make difference. I cannot see that everybody will succeed, but I'm just saying this is overall attitude you should have when you commit to the graduate school. And I also have an advice to those who think that they are passionate about science, but maybe they don't have this attitude and they come to graduate school and soon realize that it's not for them. So rather than going into that direction, just make sure that you have a scientific personality. And I think these are the characteristic traits of scientific personality. The science requires literally infinite amount of patience. And there is no way out. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think just acknowledging the failure that's sort of inevitable is a big piece of it. Um, I have sort of a random analogy because we're in New Hampshire now and we have all this snow around, and I grew up skiing a lot. And I've been thinking about how to teach skiing, and like this is very niche and totally about a random sport, but in skiing, one of the most important things is you lean forward, and there's partly the physics of how the skis actually turn. But this is a common thing for beginners is they always want to lean back because that feels safer. And the problem is you don't actually have any ability to turn when you're leaning back and you're hesitant. And what's funny is I've done it enough, I've skied my whole life essentially, that I kind of just lean into knowing that even if something looks challenging, that it's actually safer to lean forward and be aggressive than it is to lean back. And I feel like there's an analogy here with science because you can sit around and look, there's always smart people. It's like we're in physics, you're in engineering, you're always humbled by people that have brilliant ideas and, seem smarter than you. And you can sit on that, and that can give you a hesitant sort of perspective of like, oh, you don't feel like you're smart enough. You give very, I'm saying you don't want to be overly um, confident and cocky, of course, but I think approaching things with a confidence that's like really, really important in life. And maybe here's one tangible example from grad school. I think in the first year, a lot of people were trying to prove how smart they were. And so we were working through some classes, and I found that the people that were very full of themselves were the people who also didn't want to engage genuinely, like have real conversations. And when you ask someone questions of like, what are the real challenges here? And you really talk through that, you often find that the people that claim to know the most know the least. And I think going to this ego perspective, one of the things that I quickly threw out in terms of like an ego approach to science is just ask questions, right? Like ask questions of people. Obviously, I would say the one question that is not very helpful is like, I don't understand anything you just said, because then what are you supposed to do with that? But if you are genuinely interested in something and feel like it's even a stupid question, quote unquote, just ask. And ask, but in a way that says, like, here's what I do understand, and this is my perspective. Why does this happen? And I think the people that ask those kinds of questions and really push those limits are the people that really make inroads. And from an engineering perspective, it's just the easiest thing is that if you're talking to an expert and you're curious about something, it's far more efficient to just ask them a question than it is to go like try to find it in a textbook or, God forbid, like talk to ChatGPT about it. Just talk to an expert. It's a really basic thing, but I don't know if you have an example of that, and then we should probably wrap up.
I mean, yeah. What Richard Feynman said that intellectual pretense is very bad.
Mm-hmm.
If you pretend that you understand things, and if you have an ego, and if you say that, okay, I understand you, I have last questions,
Mm-hmm.
that's your ego.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're refraining from asking question is that's really your ego.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of pretense is not going to work. If you don't understand something, ask.
Yeah.
Be clear about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way you can move forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. We'll have a link to the paper in the description, and guess reach out. You can find our info on our website, which is also linked in the description for this channel. And I'm hoping to do another episode in a few weeks, potentially with my postdoc advisor, Natalie De Leon, and hopefully have some more guests on the podcast soon. So thanks for tuning in, and
Thanks, Matthias.
thanks, Salil, for a very interesting conversation. For the record, we have these chats every day, pretty much. So
Okay, well, this is a very good research group to work if you really want to do some cool experiments and get hands-on experience in a lab that is developing. It's new. Feel free to contact
yeah,
any of us if you want to talk more offline.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.